The desert sun hung low, bleeding red light across the endless plains as John Callahan led his tired horse toward the ranch gate for what he thought would be the last time. Dust clung to his boots, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights, and his once-proud land now lay dying, fences broken, the barn roof sagging like an old man's back. It had been 3 years of drought, betrayal, and silence since his wife passed. That morning, he had decided to sell everything, the horse, the land, even the last piece of his pride. But as he reached the front porch, he saw her. A woman, thin, wrapped in a tattered blanket, her dark hair matted with dust, her left arm bound with bloodied cloth. She stood barefoot, her eyes sharper than the blade at her hip. She didn't move when he approached, didn't flinch when the wind threw sand in her face. "You're on private land," he said, his voice tired, defensive. She stared at him, unblinking. Not for long. Her voice carried the low hum of thunder before rain. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a single silver dollar, scratched, dull but real. "I'll buy your horse," she said. John frowned, thinking she was delirious. "He's worth 50 times that." She took a slow breath, steadying herself. "Then I'll buy your ranch too, for the same dollar." He almost laughed, thinking it a cruel joke played by the desert itself. But something in her gaze, fierce and calm all at once, froze the words in his throat. There was no desperation there, only quiet certainty. "You're wounded," he said. "You need a doctor, not a deed." She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her blanket and pulled out a folded paper. Government issue, an official seal, half burned, but still visible. "Your land sits on the edge of old Apache territory," she said slowly. "Once ours. Then there's, but the earth remembers who bled for it." The air seemed to still. He didn't understand, but he couldn't look away. The wind carried a faint chant, the distant hum of something ancient, like the heartbeat of the land itself. He felt it in his bones, in the ground beneath his boots. "Who are you?" he whispered. She looked up at the fading sun. "The last of those who kept your land alive." Before he could reply, she set the silver dollar on the porch rail, her hand trembling from blood loss. "By your law," she said, "it's mine now." Then she turned and staggered toward the barn, collapsing before she reached it. John ran to her side, catching her just as she fell. Her pulse was weak, her breath shallow, and her eyes fluttered open one last time. "They'll come," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "When the moon changes." He carried her inside, unsure why, unsure of anything anymore. That night, he sat by the fire, the silver dollar glinting on the table beside him, a coin that somehow weighed more than gold. The wind whispered through the cracks, and from far off in the desert, faint drums began to echo, slow, rhythmic, and certain. By dawn, the horizon burned with dust. Hundreds of riders appeared like shadows out of the rising sun, the Apache, silent and watching, surrounding the ranch that had just been bought for $1 and one forgotten debt of blood. John Callahan woke to the sound of horses before the sun had fully risen, not one or two, but dozens, maybe hundreds, their hooves striking the hard desert floor in rhythm like an approaching storm. He reached for his rifle out of instinct, his heart pounding against the silence between each beat. Through the thin curtains, he saw them, silhouettes moving like shadows made of dust and flame. The Apache. the same tribe he had heard about his whole life, spoken of in whispers and fear around campfires. They came without shouting, without chaos, just a heavy, calm stillness that carried more power than any war cry. The wounded woman, who still lay on the couch, wrapped in a wool blanket, stirred weakly. "They've come," she whispered, her lips dry, eyes glassy but focused on the horizon. "You should go." John shook his head, loading the rifle anyway. "If they're here for a fight, they'll find one." She tried to smile, but pain cracked through her face. "You don't understand. They're not here for you. They're here for me." Before he could ask more, the first rays of dawn broke over the valley, and for a moment, the riders looked like spirits riding through mist, feathers glinting in gold light, paint streaked across their faces, each man sitting tall and silent. Their leader, a broad-shouldered warrior with gray in his braids, rode forward. He dismounted slowly, his expression unreadable. John stepped onto the porch, rifle steady, though his hands trembled just enough to betray him. "This is private land," he said, the same words he'd spoken to the woman the day before. The warrior looked him up and down, then at the wounded woman visible through the open door. "Not anymore," he replied in a deep, deliberate tone. "You sold it." He tossed something onto the porch, a weathered paper with John's signature still wet from the night before. $1, the man said. "Fair trade, by your own law." John felt the ground tilt beneath him. "I didn't know she was Apache," the man interrupted. "No, you didn't want to know." Around them, the riders shifted slightly, their horses restless but trained, their eyes on him, not with hatred, but with the kind of cold curiosity that made his blood run thin. The warrior turned his gaze back toward the horizon. "She's our chieftain's daughter," he said softly, "and the last keeper of the water trails beneath this land. She came to die where her people were buried. You gave her that right." John lowered his rifle slowly, confusion mixing with an ache he couldn't name. "Then why surround my home?" The warrior's eyes darkened. "Because her blood spilled here, and now this ground belongs to her tribe again. You may stay, or you may go, but you will never own it again." From inside, the woman's weak voice broke the silence. "No blood for me," she murmured. The warrior stepped forward, his tone softer now. "Sister, the desert spoke your name." She smiled faintly, then let it rest. For a long moment, no one moved. The sun rose higher, washing the valley in orange fire. Then, as if answering her final wish, the riders began to pull back, turning their horses toward the ridges, all except one. A young warrior who dismounted and placed a carved feather on John's porch. "For the one who carried her," he said quietly. John picked up the feather, feeling its weight, lighter than air, heavier than truth. By the time he looked up, the tribe was gone, leaving only hoofprints and silence behind. The woman exhaled softly, eyes closing. "You see," she whispered, $1 can buy more than land. It can buy your fate." And as the wind swept through the valley, John realized she was right. The wind that morning carried the smell of sage and ash, whispering softly against the porch rail where the feather lay. It was small, carved from bone and painted with 2 thin red lines that seemed to shimmer in the rising light. John Callahan turned it in his hands over and over, unable to understand why something so delicate felt so impossibly heavy. The riders had vanished with the dawn, leaving behind silence that hummed with unfinished words. Inside, the wounded woman, the one who had bought his world for $1, slept fitfully, her breath shallow, her skin pale as the sand outside. He had done what little he could, cleaned her wounds, fed her water, set a fire. But his mind kept circling back to that feather, as if it were the key to a lock he'd never seen. By noon, he saddled his horse and rode toward the canyon ridge, following the trail of hoofprints that shimmered faintly in the sun. The land felt different now, alive, watchful. The same rocks he'd ignored for years seemed to tilt their faces toward him, as though judging his every step. He reached the old burial mounds near the edge of his property, places his father had warned him never to tread. Bad spirits, the old man had said. But now, standing there, John felt no evil, only sorrow. He knelt, pressing the carved feather into the dust, hoping somehow it would explain itself. Instead, the wind answered. It rose suddenly, spinning sand into a slow spiral around him. For a second, he heard voices, distant, layered, the sound of chants carried on the breath of the desert. He turned and saw her, or perhaps her shadow, the woman, standing by the ridge in the same tattered blanket, though he'd left her miles behind. "You shouldn't have followed," she said softly, though her lips didn't move. John froze. "Who are you, really?" The vision stepped closer, her eyes deep and black as the canyon below. "Once this was a river," she said. "Our people drank from it. Then your kind dammed it. The land dried, and so did the hearts of men. My tribe died thirsting, while others built fences." John wanted to speak, to deny the sins of his fathers, but the words stuck like dust in his throat. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You never asked," she replied. The wind howled again, and the image faded, leaving only the echo of her words. John fell to his knees, breathing hard. When he looked down, the feather was gone, but in its place lay something new, a small stone etched with a spiral pattern, the same symbol carved above the burial mounds. He pocketed it and rode back before sunset, unsure if he was awake or dreaming. The ranch looked smaller when he returned, swallowed by dusk. Inside, the woman's eyes fluttered open. "You saw them," she murmured. John nodded, too shaken to lie. "They showed me something. The river, the mounds." She smiled faintly. "Then they've chosen you. For what?" he asked. Her gaze softened, distant, as if she were listening to something far away. "To remember," she said, "because when men forget the land remembers." Outside, a low roll of thunder echoed across the desert, though no clouds marked the sky. The world was changing, or perhaps it always had been, and he was only now seeing it. As night fell, the feather appeared once more on his windowsill, glinting in moonlight, untouched by dust or wind. It was no longer just a token, it was a promise. That night, the desert didn't sleep. The air carried whispers again, faint drums beneath the wind, soft chanting that rose and fell like breathing. John Callahan sat by the dying fire, turning the stone with the spiral symbol between his fingers. Across the room, the wounded Apache woman lay still, her chest rising slowly, her face ghostly pale in the glow of the flames. He wanted to ask her 1,000 questions about her tribe, the feather, the riders, but each time he opened his mouth, something inside him told him to stay silent. Some truths, he sensed, were meant to be earned, not asked. He dozed off near dawn, his head heavy with exhaustion. When he woke, she was gone. The blanket still held her warmth, and the door hung open, letting in the scent of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Panic struck him. He grabbed his hat, mounted his horse, and rode toward the canyon again, following faint footprints that disappeared in the shifting sand. The air grew colder the farther he went, the sky thickening with gray clouds. Near the ridge, he found her standing before a dry riverbed, tall, proud despite her wounds, her blanket fluttering like a banner in the wind. She turned slowly as he approached, eyes calm, almost kind. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "You still owe the land your silence." John dismounted, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Silence. You brought an army to my home, took my land, left me with ghosts, and now you want silence." Her gaze didn't waver. "The desert listens when men talk too loud," she said softly. "It listens, and it takes." She knelt by the cracked earth, pressing her palm to the dust. "There was water here once," she murmured. "Sweet water. My people guarded it for centuries. Then your kind fenced it, sold it, forgot it." Her words hit him harder than bullets. He looked around, imagining rivers where now only bones of stone lay. "I didn't do this," he said. "But you live on what they took," she replied, her tone without anger, only truth. "You feed your cattle on their graves. You sell the grass that grew from their blood." John felt something inside him twist, a guilt not entirely his own. "Then tell me how to make it right." She looked at him for a long moment, the wind pulling strands of her hair across her face. "By giving it back." He frowned, unsure. "The land," she nodded. "Not just the land, the memory of it. Keep it alive. Protect it. Let it breathe again." He stared at her, realizing this was no threat, it was a plea. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, she poured a handful of sand into his palm. "This is from the riverbed," she said. "When the storm comes, throw it to the wind. If it carries north, the land will forgive. If it falls at your feet," her voice trailed off, "then your time is done." Thunder rolled in the distance, and the wind grew sharp. John closed his hand around the sand, feeling its heat, its pulse. "What about you?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I've already paid my debt." And with that she stepped into the rising wind, her figure dissolving into dust and light, until only her blanket remained on the ground. John fell to his knees, staring at the sand in his hand as rain finally began to fall. The first rain in years, washing away the footprints, the blood, and perhaps the guilt of generations. The desert had spoken, and now it waited for him to answer. The storm arrived before sunset, rolling in from the north like a living beast, its belly black with lightning and wind. John Callahan stood on the porch of his crumbling ranch, the leather pouch heavy in his hand, its sand whispering faintly as though alive. The Apache woman's words echoed in his mind. "When the storm comes, throw it to the wind." The first drops of rain hit the dry earth like sparks, and the horizon blurred with dust and thunder. He could feel the power in the air, the same ancient rhythm he had heard in the drums that night. For a moment, he thought he saw her, the wounded woman, standing by the corral, her blanket whipping in the gale. But when he blinked, she was gone. The horses screamed in the distance, the ground trembling beneath their hooves. The wind howled through broken fences and empty windows, carrying the voices of the dead. John stepped off the porch, his boots sinking into wet sand. The pouch felt warm against his skin now, almost pulsing. "If it carries north, the land will forgive," he whispered, gripping it tighter. He looked around at what had once been his pride. The barn roof caved in, fences torn, fields cracked and empty. Every board of this place held the story of a man who had worked hard but never listened, never saw beyond his own borders. He raised the pouch to the sky just as lightning tore through the clouds, illuminating the valley in a blaze of silver. Thunder boomed, shaking the ground, and with a deep breath, John opened his hand and let the sand go. The wind caught it immediately, swirling it upward in a twisting column of dust and light. For a few seconds it danced above him like a spirit, shimmering gold against the dark. Then, as the woman had said, it turned north, carried fast by the storm. Relief washed through him like rain, but before he could even exhale, something changed. The wind screamed louder, pulling harder, as though angry at being set free. The sand began to glow brighter, hotter, and then it wasn't just sand anymore. It became faces, dozens of them. Men, women, children, all Apache, all shimmering in the storm, their eyes like embers in the rain. John stumbled back, terrified and awestruck. The spirits circled him, whispering in the old tongue. One reached out a child and touched his chest. "You remember now," the wind said in many voices at once. "You see what was taken." Images flooded his mind, rivers running red, fires burning villages, fences cutting through sacred ground. He fell to his knees, tears mixing with rain. "I didn't know," he cried. The storm roared back, "But you do now." Lightning struck the dry riverbed, and for the first time in decades, water began to flow again, trickling, then rushing, filling the earth's old veins. The spirits rose higher, their forms dissolving into rain, until only one figure remained, the woman, her blanket gone, her wounds healed, her eyes calm. She smiled at him, not in forgiveness, but in recognition. "The land remembers," she whispered. Then she vanished into the storm. When dawn broke, the valley was transformed. Pools of clear water sparkled in the morning light. The grass shimmered green again. The ranch stood scarred but alive. John dropped to the wet earth, trembling, the pouch now empty but warm against his heart. The land had forgiven, but it had also marked him. He was no longer its owner. He was its keeper. When the sun finally broke through the bruised sky, the world looked like it had been reborn. The valley that had once been dry and cracked now shimmered under the touch of morning light. Streams of water ran like silver veins through the earth, feeding new grass that sparkled with dew. The wind carried no more anger only, the faint rhythm of peace. John Callahan stood on the porch of what remained of his ranch, the once broken boards, now smelling of wet wood and forgiveness. His hands trembled as he poured himself a cup of coffee, the first in days, and watched as the horses grazed freely on the soft green field. They no longer needed fences. Neither did he. The storm had changed everything, not only the land, but the man who had claimed it. He had seen things no one else would believe, and though part of him wondered if it had been a dream, the warmth that still pulsed through the empty pouch told him otherwise. The Apache woman's words echoed in his head like an eternal prayer. The land remembers. For the first time, he truly understood what that meant. The land had always been alive, watching, listening, and judging those who dared to call it theirs. John realized he had never been an owner. He had been a guest. And now, after all the pain and storms, the land had accepted him not as master, but as keeper. He spent the following days mending what he could, not out of habit, but out of gratitude. He built a small shrine at the edge of the river, where he had seen the spirits rise, laying stones carefully in a circle and placing the pouch at its center. Every morning he would sit by it, whispering to the wind in English and broken Apache, asking the spirits to forgive and to guide him. Sometimes, when the wind blew from the north, he thought he heard laughter children's voices, soft and distant. Sometimes he swore he saw Hertha, woman standing among the trees, her eyes calm and knowing, her wounds gone, her blanket trailing like a flag of peace. News of the Miracle Valley spread quickly. Travelers passing through stopped to drink from the new streams, and they said the water tasted cleaner than anywhere else in Arizona. Some wanted to buy the land, others wanted to mine it, but John refused them all. "This land ain't for sale," he'd say quietly. "It's already spoken for." He grew old there, slowly, peacefully, and the people began calling him the Keeper. Children from nearby towns would come to hear his stories of storms that spoke, spirits that forgave, and a wounded woman who bought a ranch for $1 to heal a curse older than memory. When John finally passed away, the morning he was buried, the valley bloomed again after a long dry spell, as if the earth itself was breathing him home. His grave lay beside the river, under a willow tree that hadn't stood there before. No one knew who planted it. Some said the Apache woman returned one last time. Others said the land itself had remembered its promise. Years later, when the wind blew through the valley, it carried with it the faint sound of hooves and drums, and those who listened closely could hear a man's voice whispering, "We belong to the land." And somewhere beyond the horizon, where the desert met the dawn, a figure wrapped in a tattered blanket walked beside him, forever watching, forever keeping.